I'm here in virtual reality in Phil MacEachron's app Curie. We're meeting here today. He's hosting me. So if you're watching the video, enjoy it. If not, I'll try to explain what's going on. Hi, Phil. Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm a physicist by education, so I studied that in school. My really didn't have much of an interest there beyond just enjoying solving those types of problems and really liked learning about how the world works. I in college I started there was a NASA club that you got to ride on a airplane that went in zero gravity, and I really just wanted to go on that airplane. I didn't really care much about engineering, but in order to go on the airplane, you had to build an experiment with NASA in order to do it. So that kind of forced me to get into some mechanical engineering, and I ended up finding out that I actually really loved doing that. So I kind of ended up taking a couple year hiatus from physics and working in the aerospace industry. So after college, I moved out to LA and I worked at SpaceX for 2 years on the Dragon program, on the Dragon 2 spacecraft. So with that, I was working on a kind of crazy device that goes inside the propellant tanks that controls where the liquid goes in order to make sure that the capsule can maintain control while it's on orbit. And then, yeah, about 2 years ago now, I decided to leave SpaceX and get back to my original passion of science. And the real spark that got me to do that was that I tried sixth off VR for the first time on the on the HTC Vive, and I sort of just from doing a couple of the demos with the hands-on interactions there, I realized that there was like tons of potential in VR to change the way that we do science education and to do that in a scalable way. So that's what really pushed me to leave aerospace and start working in the VR ed tech space.
Pretty cool story, especially the NASA plane thing. That sounds amazing.
Yeah,
How was
yeah.
it?
It was pretty awesome. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, the basically like the world's most intense roller coaster where you go up like tens of thousands of feet and then like basically fly in a parabola, and then it when it's accelerating downwards, it accelerates down at the same speed of gravity. So you get to float around there like you're in zero G. I was fortunately able to I haven't been able to experience that again for several years, but in this app you can actually recreate that a little bit. You can create a couple objects here. So like when I floated in the cabin, we had, like our experiment which was tied down, but we were also able to bring some toys with us. So I had like a bean bag that I was throwing around, and if we go in here and turn down the gravity level. So now we're in microgravity. Then I float around. I can see all these objects in here will float around like we're in zero G. So last time I was able to play with things in microgravity was on that airplane, but now that VR is a thing, I can unfortunately do that again from the comfort of my home.
And much cheaper and safer.
Yep, exactly. Yep, a lot safer, a lot cheaper. And students can do it themselves without having to be a part of this hard NASA program.
Phil, we are now meeting virtually in your app Curie in VR, and I look around, looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what your goals are with it?
Sure. Yeah, so this really started mostly just as like a passion project. I didn't have a business in mind, and I didn't even have an exact like use case in mind for who the users would be. I sort of just wanted something that for down the road, I don't have any children now, but for down the road when I do have kids, in a way that I can teach them physics in a way that they would really enjoy and that they would understand more quickly than learning it just through textbooks and drawing on paper. So basically just started tinkering around in my garage a couple years ago with building simple physics simulations in VR. Um, Again, I'm really without any idea of how to make a business out of it. So it was really started as a passion project. Um, and yeah, the power of social VR became pretty apparent. I think I tried, might have been Rec Room or Alt Space a couple years ago, and being able to see somebody else like I'm seeing you now with six off on head and hands is a pretty compelling experience. So that pushed me early on to start doing multi-user simulations. But for a while, I was kind of in the learning phase. Hadn't done a lot of software development before VR, so a fair amount of the early stages of things was just kind of making some physics prototypes, figuring out how to network them, and learning all the software to do that. And then basically over time, I sort of tried to, I sort of did the opposite of what they recommend you do with startups. A lot of the times with startups, you find a problem and then you go solve it. And I did the thing that you're not supposed to do, which is you like build something cool and then try to find a use for it. because that was really just a passion project where I was exploring making science stuff in VR. And then now I'm basically trying to explore different ways that it can actually become a product in order to scale it up and help people with it. And the first way that I started doing that was with one-on-one tutoring. That was something that was accessible to me as someone who's studied the material before. I could tutor other people in it, people who are taking high school physics, for example. And so first I was using the app just for a little bit of one-on-one tutoring. So I'd go to students' houses with my laptops and headsets, do an in-person tutoring lesson, and then at the end we'd play around in the app a little bit to get them to interact with some of the simulations. So that was kind of the first way that I started turning this into not just a passion project, more of a actual product.
Oh, amazing story. Amazing. So, can you show us a little bit, for those who are on the video, how your app works here in VR?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the form that the app is taking now is more of a sandbox to give you more like flex in creating different simulations. So let's see. We can create a table here, position that, and then we can open up a rail on it so I can attach an anchor part and a rail. So this is a lot of
The thing over there looks like something out of Star Wars.
yeah, it does a little bit. A little ball, a little orb. So then yeah, a lot of one common simulation type that a lot of classes would use is one with like a spring on a rail, and then you can demonstrate various concepts of like energy conservation or Hooke's law and things like that. So I can set this up here, and then right now we're in build mode, so you can sort of position different objects to create your simulations. And then when you run simulate, it'll allow you to actually apply physics to objects. So I can move this, and it will respond by moving back and forth. It's going really quick right now because we have a high spring constant. I can turn that down here. So now it has a lower spring constant, and it will move back and forth slower.
Can I try it out?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you just reach out and grab the block.
Cool, so I take it here. Oh, it's attached.
Yeah, yeah, there's just kind of a force that's being applied to the rail.
Cool, cool.
You can actually, one second, I'm going to build mode. I'll attach this over here. That responds a little better. Then you can visualize various parameters on the block. So if the teacher is instructing on Hooke's law, then they can demonstrate like, the spring force that's being applied. So now when you move it, I'm in build mode. Now when I go to simulate mode and you move it, it'll show you the force from the spring that's being applied. And so you can grab that yourself and stretch it. And if you stretch it down over there, it should show you a large force the further away you hold it. And then if you hold it at the equilibrium, it should show you like almost zero force.
That's pretty nice.
So yeah,
Force is linear to the displacement of the object.
yeah, it is. Yep. Yeah, with the
Yeah, okay.
yeah, exactly. So there's obviously like a drawing tool in here as well. So if you're explaining to somebody what the equation is for that, you're stating how it's linear. So you can explain that the spring force or Fs is equal to the displacement. It's actually a minus sign, and then displacement, which we'll call x, times k. It's usually written kx, but same thing. Uh, and you can visualize the displacement as well. If I reset this here. Yeah, displacement is what you'd imagine it would be. Pretty straightforward. So now you can see both the spring force and the displacement, which go in opposite directions. So yeah, the kind of initial mode that this app like we used in or I'm just starting to use it in now, is for the teacher to demonstrate things. So that's kind of more of a standard lecture format where the students are observing and the teacher is explaining things and using the simulation here to them the different uh, concepts that they're discussing. But then a big desire with the app as well is to make so that students can interact with it themselves. So once the teacher has explained a bit of a problem and set it up, they could then give the students a task. Like with this one here, you could hide the spring constant from the students and tell them that you want them to figure out what the spring constant is now that the teacher's explained the equation. And so you can copy the simulation to the students. So the first thing that the teacher would do is to make the graph object appear. There's a graphing component here. Let me hide this as well. Graph. So you open up the graph, and then you can copy a version of the simulation to each of the students. So I'll do that now. Go to the drawing. Copy. So right now the classroom's set up just for 2 students. Since the homeschool class I'm doing right now just has 2 students in it. So now each of the students gets a version of the simulation as well as the um, like graph component over here. So if they're tasked with graphing the force or figuring out what the spring constant is using the force of the spring, they can open up the menu for the graph here, open up the menu for the spring, and then also open up the menu here for the cube. So here I can, I'll let you do this one. So the way that you can add points to the graph is if you grab one of these nodes here. So you see that blue dot that says D. If you reach out and grab that with your trigger, you should be able to place that on the x-axis up there, the top white sphere. Yeah, so now that you've placed that there, it appears in the graph over there. So it says displacement on the x-axis. And then if you grab the spring force here, I'll turn that on as well. You can grab Fs, be able to put that on the y-axis. So, in a real class, have the students figure that out themselves. But now it's associated those two properties with the graph, in which now allows the students, when they run the simulation, I can do from here, the simulation's running, I can move this to a different position. So I can move it over to here. And then if you press log data point there, you can go ahead and press that button. You should put a point on the graph. So I can hold it somewhere else. You should be able to log. Whoop. So we got a little bug here. So it's logging the points, but it's showing the spring force as being a constant. So I just changed some of the software on this recently. That's good to know. But if that weren't bugging out, what it would do is show the both the displacement as it did, but then it would also show the spring force. So it would make like a scatter plot here just of the points that you got from that data. And that would allow the student to then draw a line through it and figure out the slope of the line. And once they've done that, they could then solve for the spring constant, so which is equal to the slope. That's what that gives you an idea for how like you can flip the classroom around a little bit to have the students interact with simulations. And then basically just kind of switch back and forth between students doing simulations, and then you can, as a teacher, you can clear the student simulation again, back so it's just in presentation mode with the teacher's simulation. And then the teacher could move on to the next concept and present that, and then switch to the student mode again so they can have time to interact. So that, yeah, I think that kind of gives a feel for the lecture flow a little bit.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, I have to say, and I can definitely see how this is useful in a classroom or in a teaching setting where students are just much more engaged with the content of what is being taught. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So let me shortly summarize what we've just done, just for the people who aren't watching the video but are listening to the audio only. Basically, Phil showed me some of the tools he has been working on. He was showing me a example on how to teach about Hooke's law or spring constants. And the cool thing is that he could just build like a workbench with an object on it and a spring attached to it and fixed onto the table by a rail, and then he could just replicate that to the students who are also in the same room, and they could also play around with it at the same time. For example, the teacher could say, hey, check this out, and the students can try to replicate it or can try to find out a value as a task. And also they could just graph stuff and so on. So that's pretty cool. So Phil, let's see, what's your goal with all this? I mean, it's pretty cool tech, but how do you plan on kind of bringing this to the market, and what are your goals?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm teaching the class currently to homeschool students. Um, Students who are already in a physical school, some of them don't have access to physics teachers, but either way, their lifestyles at the moment is set up so that they don't typically take classes after they finish school. Pretty much all their academics happen in a physical school. Um, since most students are there, I would certainly like to reach those students longer term, but as finding some people who initially are in the most need of physics education and who would make like excellent users to start working with the app, the homeschool market is really a great place to go initially. because the students are often eager learners. They don't have other options a lot of the time, particularly for a subject like physics that can be hard to teach and not as many parents are familiar with. So by working with homeschool students, I've eventually have a profile on this website, working with OutSchool, which is the marketplace for homeschooling, and or just for direct-to-consumer education in general. And the class I have listed at the moment, the longer form class, is a 4-week class where you get like an introduction to mechanics and physics. So the first week we're covering kinematics, second week forces, third week energy, and the fourth week we do some collisions and recap of the whole class. And so the two students who are taking that class at the moment are both actually, they don't have VR headsets themselves, so they're both joining via the desktop version. So they both have laptops that, they play Minecraft on and stuff like that, so it's capable of running this app. Um, so they run it from in their web browser with a WebGL file, and then I'm actually teaching it from within one of the within the Oculus Rift headset. So I'm basically have full body presence like this, so they can see me and I can write on the board easily and point out things, and then they can still get to participate and interact with the simulations. They have more limited controls since being in desktop, it's a little harder to manipulate some of the simulations. But so far I found it actually works pretty well for the teacher to sort of guide the students by setting them up with things and then letting them still do some level of interaction to still provide inputs and demonstrate that they're understanding what you're teaching. So yeah, we just did first week last week and it went really well. And then I have my next class today, which I'm excited for.
That sounds really, really nice. I think it's a good idea with the desktop app since, that not a lot of people have the VR headset or a VR headset available to them. So you're definitely kind of like enlarging your potential students with providing desktop app. And I think since you as a teacher still can be in VR and um, explaining VR, they still get the benefits of at least some of the benefits of being a VR app. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So, what are the next steps like in the long term? Let's say mid and long term. Where do you see your app going? What are your goals with it? Can you talk a little bit more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the best case scenario is that like the OutSchool model works well in that teachers have a lot of independence with that. So the teachers aren't employees of OutSchool in that case. They're basically interacting on a marketplace. So the teachers get to create their own classes and really have a lot of autonomy in that, which results in there being a big diversity of the type of classes that are taught. So I think that model is very appealing. So having this be a platform where the classes can take place, and then having teachers construct their own classes that they execute in here, would be a pretty ideal system. So essentially being a marketplace for 3D interactive live classes, and and teachers could, I think, some degree of partnering with teachers a little bit where you can create some custom content for them, but with the kind of end goal of just having there be enough flexibility in the app that teachers can come in here and make their own class out of it. So yeah, I think for long term, that's basically where you'd be at, where it's sort of like the Zoom of education, but instead of being video call, it's 3D, like a game-like environment.
And what about in the immediate shorter term? What are you gonna do?
I was gonna say in the shorter term horizon, I think the timeline is at building out a full physics course. Just from talking to a few parents in OutSchool, that they've been enjoying the classes. They said their students really like the class, but they're looking for a way that their student can get like a full physics education. So right now, I basically have like kind of the first third of a physics class, but to expand that into being like a full introductory physics course where you learn like rotational motion and orbital mechanics and like electrodynamics and all that kind of stuff. I think that would be the kind of near-term goal, and then basically from there start adding in other subjects. Once physics is fully built out and there's full physics courses, add a math course as well where you can interact with geometry and do basic things like addition and subtraction and stuff like that as well. So that yeah, it can be kind of more generalized from there.
How would you teach math in VR then?
Yeah, so I haven't planned out too much of the math yet. A lot of it would be whiteboard based. So, I mean, you can do that on a desktop now where the student can, you can pose them a question and they can solve it by writing, 1 + 1 = 2 on their board. But having them do that in here with some degree of visual aid as well, if you put 3 objects on the table and you say, if I take away 2 of them, how many will you have left? It's still just asking them what 3 - 1 is. But for a student who's very new to math, be able to see that in a visual way, where you could really easily pose new problems to them. So you can just, have kind of some simulations prepared ahead of time and then just present it to the students. I think it'll just help lend some importance to math because it's not just 3 minus 1 by itself. It's within the context of a problem. Like you have 3 apples and you sell 2 of them. How many do you have left? And that's a word problem, which students then have to picture. But if you can see it as a 3D problem where you're at an apple stand, you have 3 apples, and then someone's going to buy 2, it's more clear to the student how that would matter and lend some importance to the math. So, yeah, I don't think the style of pedagogy would change a ton from making it 3D, but it would lend some importance to the student and help them understand, like help them be motivated about it.
That's cool. I'm just thinking about, like doing word problems in VR could be a cool thing in general. Like, let's say, you usually have those problems where you say, okay, train A is starting at this station, train B is starting at this station. Um, you know, A goes at this speed, B goes at this speed. When will they kind of like meet? So you can like simulate this in VR. It would be pretty cool. Just make sure to not give a stopwatch to the students. So earlier you said that you're doing, Zoom for education but in 3D. And so my question is, why isn't there a Zoom for education in 2D now? So what's different in 3D in this case?
Yeah. So I think the thing that's most similar to is a multi-user video game. Um, and obviously games like Minecraft are very popular these days, and the purpose of those are entertainment and socialization. Um, and you actually are starting to see some classes being taught in there. There's a fair amount of demand for it since most of some of these classes are listed on OutSchool, but there's also companies separate from OutSchool that offer classes taught in Minecraft frequently to homeschool students. Um, and I think the reason why that's growing is that it's very engaging for the students, obviously, if they like interacting in 3D game-like environments. But the limitations of it is that it's hard to do a serious educational experience in a game like that where you're interacting with it over a keyboard and a mouse. Um, because, I mean, for starters, Minecraft isn't made for education. If you added in slide decks and a mathematics system, then a teacher could more easily teach math in Minecraft or something. But custom making an application for it allows you to like achieve a lot higher rates of education. So like trying to teach math in Minecraft versus in here where you have a whiteboard that you can easily draw on is obviously going to be a different experience. I think the main reason why it hasn't existed so far is that the market for direct-to-consumer education has been pretty small. There have been homeschooling families for a while, but only now is that industry growing. And there hasn't been like a good way to reach those families until very recently with like innovations like the like OutSchool starting up. So I think it's mostly just a combination that people could create these technologies, a game-like environment where you hold live classes, didn't think there was a business opportunity for it. But I now think that there is, and that people are holding businesses teaching in Minecraft. It's just somewhat of a soft skill, not so much like a core education. Whereas with the application custom built for anything biology, chemistry, math, physics, you can actually achieve like core academic uh, lessons. So I think that's really the source of it is the market just became ready for it now with enough people at home with laptops open to direct consumer education, and the technology just getting there too with like it being as easy as it is to create 3D content. I didn't mention VR there because I almost feel like VR is somewhat of an optional part of it. I could be teaching the class I'm teaching from on the desktop. It certainly is more fun for students to see a teacher teaching from in VR. So I do think that while it might not have been necessary, having the ability for the teacher to lecture from in VR and eventually, of course, having the students in here too, that's a big jump as well and making it a more compelling experience. So I think the combination of those things.
Okay, I can see that being an important part. Like as we know that biggest one of the biggest challenges of high school or like middle school education is also how do you keep your students engaged? How do you explain stuff that's abstract, that's hard to explain? Cool. So I guess my next question would be: you're building all this, and it's not easy. What would you say is your biggest challenge that you have kind of like to overcome to make this the success you wanted to be?
Yeah. Let's see. I think making and making the app be flexible enough that teachers can hold their own style of lesson in here, but still being easy enough to use. Currently, I'm the only person teaching classes in here, and it works well for me because I built the thing, so I know all of its ins and outs, and I was able to add in things that I wanted for the class that I'm teaching. But as I start expanding to working with other teachers, I think that's definitely going to be a challenge. There's one teacher who hasn't started teaching in it yet, but who I'm talking to about what he would like to see in here, and uh, and and it's easy enough to add in the features that he requests, but particularly when they're aligned with features that were on my roadmap anyway. But making sure that the app is easy enough for him to use um, it's definitely I think the biggest challenge because yeah, obviously for this to have a big impact, it needs to scale beyond just me as a teacher. So onboarding new teachers in a way that the app is useful enough for them, or sorry, simple enough to use and still gives them the power that they want.
Yeah, definitely. Although this is more like a technical challenge, right?
Yeah,
So I'll be more interested in kind of like what kind of market size challenges do you see?
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Give me one second. I actually need to plug in my headset here. I'm getting a low battery warning.
Sure. You can see, guys, we're still in the early days of VR, um, but we're getting there. So let's give Phil a moment to plug in his headsets.
Hmm. See
Oculus
if this will
Quest.
work. All right, I have power now.
Great.
So yeah, you were asking about the market challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think so. In the short term, the size of the homeschool market, um, well, I guess that's more of a medium-term problem. I don't think there's too many challenges really in the short term, besides scaling to other teachers, because there are a lot of homeschool families, and having access to a quality physics course where they can, or math courses where a student can both enjoy the class and like complete serious curriculum. There's definitely a need for that, and there's definitely a lot of users who want that right now. Um, so I don't anticipate there being too many market challenges in the shorter term because like I said, the homeschool market is definitely in need of this. Um, but beyond the homeschool market, I think there's going to that there would be a challenge to expand beyond that because students now who go to physical schools are already getting all of their courses there, and so to come home after school and take more courses would be like fairly strenuous on them. Like a lot of parents might think that that's like too much time spent learning and not enough time with like liberty to study what they want. So I think for this to reach more students outside of the homeschool industry, there needs to be a bit of a like shift in how in-school classes are held. These aren't my original ideas. There's various people who've been talking about this for a little while now, but I think it's likely that there'll be physical schools that if they don't offer a physics class um, or if like they want to improve the quality of the physics class, that they can have students go into VR headsets while in school and take a course that's part of their school, but take it online and with live lessons from an instructor who's remote. So I think that sort of shift in schools, that's going to be like a bit of a challenge to see how that evolves over time. But again, since there's a need there, there's lots of schools who want physics programs who don't have it. Um, it'll just be a matter of figuring out how to work with those schools, because since a big complicated business operation like that with schools can take a long time to orchestrate. So that'll be definitely a challenge in the longer term.
Yeah, I mean it's a really cool idea working with schools who otherwise can't afford or like don't have like a good physics or science class. Give them affordable but high quality option. So, what if I'm a teacher in a normal like traditional classroom? Can I also use Curie, or is it not designed for that specific use case in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would definitely like to support that. Um, I think the probably the same challenge I mentioned earlier about onboarding new teachers is something that's a concern there. Just because it does take a while to learn how to use any piece of new software for teachers, and teachers already have very busy schedules. So if there's a teacher who's has their class set up such that they have time to learn both how to use this application and how to manage a classroom of students using VR, which there definitely are some teachers in that situation, then I would definitely like to support them using the app. Um, and I think that would be that'd definitely be great for teachers to be able to do certain types of simulations that either that they couldn't do in real life, like you mentioned, because of having zero gravity or various other things, or simulations that like you could do in real life, but the school either doesn't have the equipment for it, or would take too long to set up, or be too dangerous for students to do. So for any of those use cases, I think teachers using it in their existing classrooms would make a lot of sense. And I think at the moment that would be a little hard to support since the app is still in development. But once the app gets to a more mature point where it's a little easier to use and is more fully featured, then I would definitely like to communicate to teachers that it's available.
Makes sense. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Um, all right, let's see. So we've talked a little bit about more the technical side and like the immediate and midterm strategies that are important and where virtual reality is today. I want to switch the conversation now a little bit to kind of like the future. Um, I think it's always interesting to talk about how VR will impact education and society in like let's say 10 years or 20 years time. So let me ask you,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah.
Do you think VR will be super important in education, or in
Yeah.
general, how will VR
I think
enabled
that
schools look like?
yeah,
K through 12.
K through 12 specifically. Right. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I think that there are some things that work better digital and online, and there are many other things that work better without any technology and in person. Um, and so I think that regardless of whether students are in a physical school or being homeschooled, that that education for both those types of students will look similar in that they will have many hours spent during the day with like very little technology and in-person interactions, whether that's interactions on the playground, playing sports, or certain subjects that they're learning in classrooms. But I think there'll be more of a shift towards certain core academic subjects and extracurriculars being conducted in digital spaces, um, just because of the like affordances that are provided from both VR and the um, ability to hold live classes online. So I really think it'll be a mix of the two. And kids in school will go to one class in the morning. It'll be a language class, for example, and they'll be doing it live and in person and talking with their classmates and with their teacher. And then they'll go next door for their math class, and for that class, they might be doing geometry that day, and then they'll be in VR headsets for 30 minutes while they're interacting with geometric simulations to learn about certain concepts. And then they'll stop for a lunch break. And then after that, they'll go to physics class, which could also be in VR potentially, for half the class where they're interacting with certain simulations, and then they pull off the headsets and then they do a live real life physics simulation to complement that. So I really think that kind of blended style is going to be something that both in school students and homeschool students are doing more and more. But I think one important common thing between both of those is going to be like the human interaction and having live classes, because the ability to, when you don't understand something, communicate that to other students or to a teacher, and then get help in understanding it, as well as just the skills of figuring things out in teams, is something that is so important in education and can both be done live as well as online. So I think that's really what kind of the combination of things will look like for education down the road. Yeah, and as far as whether that's in VR or AR, that just depends on where the tech goes. But I think both will probably be happening in a big way.
So you're saying in the future there will still be school activities that are better taught in real life than in VR?
Yeah. So for the if you're sitting together looking at the same screen, you can talk about things together, but and you can switch back and forth between doing things. So for some things, if you're doing like pair programming, for example, where one person is writing code and the other person is looking things up and consulting you, then perhaps that perhaps that particular educational like interaction would be best done side by side on a screen. For something like a physics lab where you're setting up things and collecting data and stuff like that, that would take place better where students can be providing inputs at the same time. Someone can take out a ruler and set it up, and someone can hold up a tennis ball. And so for an interaction like that, where people are interacting simultaneously, that's like clearly better done in a way where both people can provide input, which means that it's a multi-user thing. And then if it's a hands-on spatial thing, then that would be better done in VR. So so yeah, those are perhaps just two examples where yeah, it might be better on desktop or certain things would be better and done in VR.
Okay, I hear you. But let's say in the future VR gets as good as reality. Let's say it's indistinguishable. As Parmalaki said that he thinks that VR is the medium that will end all media, meaning that every media that has existed before VR you can kind of like simulate in VR. So why do I need a kind of like a big ass TV if I can just have that in VR? Um, you know what I mean. So how in that sense wouldn't just make sense that we can say okay, it all happens in VR, and we don't need screens, we don't need because we can just sit next to each other in a virtual room while we're physically in a different location and have the exact same experience as we would have in a real classroom together. So I mean, how do you, let's say, if that happens, how will that change school and, I don't know, society maybe even? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I guess yeah, on the longer term horizon, if the two technologies were VR headsets or desktop monitors, then like yeah, as you've said, once desktop monitors get to the point where they can have the same pixel density as for a monitor that's in front of you, that it's the same experience as a monitor, but just with options to do more things. And if the networking is good enough that you can sit next to another person and clearly see their monitor, then yeah, there doesn't seem to be much reason to have monitors. I would be curious to know on that time horizon. I don't know much about the rate that pixel density on headsets is increasing, but I am curious to see how other technologies increase in parallel with that. Obviously, brain-machine interfaces are very far behind right now, but if some type of VR device that is more connected directly into your brain were to arrive, in this century, then that could pretty quickly replace what we call now to be VR headsets.
Yeah, I mean, brain-machine interfaces are super interesting, right? Basically, what I think will happen is, once we have the working brain-machine interfaces, then you don't need the VR headsets anymore. So for me, it's like maybe a little bit next step, because you don't need to deal with the photons anymore. We can just
Sure.
put it directly into the brain, right? But realistically, that's a harder technology than making really good VR headsets. So I think in the next
Yeah.
decade or two, we'll see more just super great VR
Right.
headsets, and then slowly, maybe I don't know, 50 to 100 years, super effective and small and easy to kind of like install in air quotes brain machine interfaces that will kind of like, I don't know, once you're there, then everything will be crazy. But I'm super curious to see how this will all play out. And I mean, it's an interesting time to be alive, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that you and I have discussed before, which I think is a interesting conversation, is the benefits of creating multi-user VR content now for education purposes versus making making single-user content. Yeah, we were just discussing the longer term horizon, and I think both of you and I share a vision that in the long term, like having fantastic multi-user experiences for education is going to make a lot of sense. But one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that I do think that it might make even more sense in the shorter term to be working on single-user simulations because the complexities, particularly in physical classrooms, of getting students into a shared VR app is quite high. And if most of your lesson is taking place in the real world and then you have a 10-minute section in VR, trying to connect a bunch of 6DoF headsets together with network software in the classroom and get all the students in the same room for a brief demo is pretty challenging. So I do think there's a good opportunity right now for creating single user content in order to meet the needs of classrooms that already have headsets. So I know that's something that you've thought about a lot as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have we've discussed about this many times. And for those who don't know, when we started with the Kosmos School, we, similar to what Phil's doing now, we're doing life science classes. So we had a teacher, and students would just come in, meet with the teacher, and then learn about different topics. In fact, we were also teaching physics, but it was a little bit different than what you have here. Yours is maybe more academic. Ours was more, I
Sure.
would say, extracurricular or for fun. So students would like build a rocket ship and use it to fly to the International Space Station, but they wouldn't,
Sure.
would talk about like the rocket formula and like how rocket fuel is made, but we wouldn't kind of like go into the details. We wouldn't graph the rocket formula or something. So it's kind of like a different I want to say different target group or use case. Um, but for us it didn't work out that well, and based on our learnings, we said it's too
Right.
complex. Kind of like you have to create the software. Creating network software is more complicated than doing single player software, and then you have to
Yeah.
have the teachers, you have to create the pedagogy, you have to create the simulations, you have to find students that do have time at the specific times after school. You have to make sure that they have VR headsets. So and then of course you have to convince them to pay money for that. So for us, we're like, okay, this is probably too much for the still early days of VR, and we want to kind of like dial back and go back to the basics and say,
Right.
okay, we're just now creating simulations that can be used super
Yeah.
simply in the classroom by the teacher as kind of like an additional material to their content that they're already teaching in their science classes, just to improve engagement and improve kind of like
Yeah.
efficacy of the material for the students and for the teacher. But yeah, we'll see how
Yeah.
that goes,
Absolutely.
basically.
But I do like with the approach you're taking that it does scale rather easily. So you've made the simulation that is self-contained with the educational information built into it that a student who can just pick that up can learn on their own. And I think that's sort of like improved version of a textbook style education where you can be self-directed. Like there's absolutely a huge need for that. Because unfortunately this app right now, if I put a student in this, they might have some fun in here throwing springs around, but they would learn nothing on their own. They might get a rough feel for some concepts, but they wouldn't really get any important takeaways. Because like I said, this is more like a Zoom call where you need to have an educator on it to communicate the information to students and guide them through experiences. So I had some, you know, I obviously throughout my education had some great lectures in my life and great interactions with teachers and labs, but I also did learn a ton in college just from reading my textbook. So having really solid single user experiences where students can, without much money and without help from another person, just guide themselves. That's like awesome, and I think we need a lot more of that in the world.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, but like again, I think there are like different approaches um, to kind of like push VR in education, and I really believe that there is a place for, like, in each of these spaces, different companies will be built, and
Mm-hmm.
I just think that like any effort done by people is a step forward to kind of like push education, push VR, make it go mainstream, right?
Right.
And yeah, so it's just so exciting times, and it's hard to predict what will exactly happen. Anyways, Phil, thanks for your time. Let's wrap this up. Thanks for being on the podcast. I think it was a lot of fun. Thanks for hosting me in your app Curie, and yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation for sure.
I have a last question for me.
Yeah, I guess one last question would be for both of us, I guess, is what other like you and I have both been teaching science in here, but what other subjects would you really like to see taught in VR? Obviously, like you talked about in the long term, like the sky's the limit. There's nothing you couldn't do. Um, but yeah, what would you be most excited to see in here apart from science classes?
Hmm, that is a good question. Let's see. Um, maybe an yeah. What about engineering? I mean, okay, that's like similar to science, but I think you could like still do cool stuff. No.
Yeah, yeah, that would be though. Get to see the stress and strain in different things, build little models.
Yeah, would be cool. But other than that, maybe
Mm,
like what about art? You know, like you can like art stuff. You can like do new forms of art, like
yeah.
sculpturing or painting, stuff like Quill or Medium already does. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but like I guess another cool thing would be acting.
Right.
You know that like the newest Lion King movie that just came out, they filmed that completely in VR. Did you know that?
Oh, right. Yeah, I heard they filmed that. Yeah, just a little bit. I heard they used VR headsets to position the cameras and whatnot.
Yeah, it's like crazy. It's like the whole world that they filmed in only exists
Mm.
in VR, and you know basically everything was in there. And yeah, they somehow used like real cameras
Oh,
also to position or move the cameras, but like it's all done in VR, so none of the landscape or
there.
whatever exists. I think except like one shot or something. But it's crazy. So, anyways, like think about having like an app where you can invite your
Right.
friends over, have like a like let's say we
Uh-huh.
had like one or two friends over here in this room, and someone has the lights, someone has the camera, and we just kind of like film a movie. It could be like an action movie, like a comedy movie.
Uh-huh.
So and like with like a budget that's super super small, and you still have like
Right.
all the cool explosion effects or like
Yeah.
have the kind of the landscape that you want in the background
Mm-hmm.
would be super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think acting, I would definitely kind of like try that out, and I think
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people would.
That'd be awesome for people interested in acting or directing or anything like that. They
Yeah,
could definitely have a good
yeah,
yeah, that'd be great
would be awesome.
for sure.
Um, was what do you think should be auto science would be taught in VR?
Yeah. Good question. I
What's your
think
question?
one I'm complimenting myself here. I think history classes is one that I would love. That one's you need to spend a lot more in your art budget to do that well. But if you were to have really cool Egyptian scenes or ancient Roman scenes, and you could have students learn about history of the Egyptians or Romans in that context, I think that would be very cool. Um, the the one thing I think that just occurred to me now that I've experienced before that you need to be somewhat careful with certain educational things is not showing students too much, such that they don't practice imagining things as well. That's something I've been trying to do a little bit in here. Before I run a simulation, I'll ask the students to picture what it's going to do. So they'll try to picture the rockets flying up on their own, and then once I've given them some time to do that, then I'll run the simulation. I think that would be important for history things as well to have students, teacher can describe what the Colosseum was like, and they can try to picture it, and then they can take them to it and visit it. Um, because yeah, you don't want to like stifle students' practice at imagining things by just showing them too much. But at the same time, obviously, in history classes, when they teach about the Egyptians, they'll show slide decks with pictures or artists' illustrations still. So I definitely think there's a place for that, and that could be enhanced to a huge degree by putting it into VR. So that'd be awesome. I've done just a couple little tours. There was a educational experience on I think it was called Nefari. Is that the right name? Some Egyptian like queen. It was a tour of her tomb, and it was a live experience. It was me and a couple people, and then a guide who was an expert on Egyptian like uh, archaeology, and that was just like a free experience on I think that was on I forget what app that was, but yeah. So yeah, more things like that in the classroom would be awesome. We get to go on like historical field trips. I'd love to see that as well. But yeah, all these things. I love your idea on the acting. That'd be great. Get practice at directing and acting in an app. That'd be really cool to see. There's a lot of potential with VR clearly.
Yeah, I mean, like history, I think is also pretty cool. Like, you could have
Right.
like you could be like in the medieval times. You know,
Yeah.
you're like a peasant or something that only eats like rice and bread the whole day, and there's the kings, and you can really see how it was. You know, life back there, really feel it,
Mm,
and it would be
right.
pretty impressive, I guess, and pretty remarkable to see, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. You had to see by candlelight and stuff like that. It was
Yeah,
always really dark inside back in the medieval ages. That's something that you don't think about a lot unless you're there. Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be cool to see.
be would be great. Yeah. So yeah, well, you know, I think it was great that you showed what you're working on, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy life and sharing it with us. And you know, as I said, this was like the first video I did on the podcast, and the first
Yeah.
video in VR also. So let's see how this works out. Thanks for being the skinny pig. And
Yeah.
you
For
know,
sure.
yeah, if it works out well, I can do more of those things, and then see how it works out. Anyways, thank you for so much, Phil, for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, John. This was fun.